All right, thanks for staying with us. And what now? Let's turn our attention to the troubling issue in Africa, the war in Sudan. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badri Abdelati has met with Sudan's chairperson of a Transitional Sovereign Council to convey President Abdel Assisi's greetings and reaffirming Egypt's unwavering support for Sudan's unity, security and stability. They met in Port Sudan in a renewed push to advance a ceasefire plan for the war-torn country. Ceaseless battles have led to humanitarian crises arising from the capture of Darfur, a key city. Egypt has condemned the atrocities in El Fasher, stressing the need to commit to the peace plan announced in September by the US, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The proposed plan envisions a 3-month humanitarian truce, followed by a 9-month political process to resolve the conflict. The RSF had accused Egypt of launching airstrikes against its fighters and prolonging the war. We have more to tell you in this report.
Grievous allegations by the leader of the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, Mohamed Dagalo. The RSF claims Egyptian airstrikes attacked and killed several of its fighters at Jebel Moya, near Sudan's capital Khartoum, and that Egypt's increased involvement by airstrikes in support of the Sudan military supply of drones and combat training escalates the conflict. The RSF has threatened a retaliatory response to Egypt's undue influence on the war. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry has denied the allegations, calling on the international community to investigate it. This marks a significant escalation to the more than 2 years conflict and the rise in tension in the region between Sudan and Egypt. Once part of the Omar al-Bashir government, which it toppled, the RSF has been fighting against the Sudan armed forces since 2022. With hundreds of thousands displaced, this has been described as the world's largest humanitarian crisis, and the World Food Programme, WFP, says more than 25 million people face acute hunger and at least 13 areas risk famine. Local analysts, NGOs, the United Nations and its agencies have sounded the alarm over the involvement of foreign countries in prolonging the war.
I issue a stark warning about events unfolding in Kordofan. Since the capture of Al Fasher, the civilian casualties, the destruction and mass displacement there have been mounting. There is no sign of de-escalation. To the contrary, developments on the ground indicate clear preparations for intensified hostilities with everything that implies for its long-suffering people. Given the cataclysmic violence in Al Fasher, states, especially those who have influence over the parties to the conflict, are put on notice that unless they act quickly and decisively, there will be more of the carnage and bloodshed and the atrocities that we have already witnessed. The Security Council's arms embargo is clear. The provision of continuing military support to sustain parties committing serious violations must stop. I repeat my plea for an immediate end to the violence both in Darfur and in Kordofan. Bold and urgent action is required by the international community.
Emergency session on Friday, the 14th of November, to address atrocities in Sudan.
Now, for a close look at the war, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, David Awarawa, joins me on the news. Good to have you join us, Prof.
Thank you for inviting me. Good afternoon.
So, Prof, as we've seen during this war, in the last 2 years of this war, which is since 2023, Egypt is once again stepping up diplomacy to contain the crisis. I want to get your thoughts on this latest meeting and why you think we haven't seen regional coordination in addressing the security and humanitarian challenges in Sudan.
The intervention of Egypt is welcome because an agreement was actually reached last month. 4 countries, the US was part of it, Saudi Arabia was part of it last month, when there was supposed to be a ceasefire, and the violence we have had in the past 2 days were not expected. But it will appear as if the leaders of this conflict are not willing to bring the conflict to an end yet, anytime soon, which is very, very disheartening, especially when one considers that 2.5 years, the country is devastated, humanitarian crisis, to, a level that is almost unprecedented. So the effort that Egypt is making is welcome to ensure that the leaders are, keep to the terms of what they signed to in September and bring the conflict to an end and end the misery that Sudanese have faced in the past 2.5 years.
And the foreign minister also urged the parties to pursue an inclusive political settlement aimed at ending the protracted war. But I'm wondering what it would take. Do you see a political settlement ending this war or a military intervention?
Political settlement can end it, except that both sides seem to, cancel each other out. It's now almost a stalemated war. And that comes to the point you made earlier regarding the intervention of, regional bodies. We expect the AU to have been more actively involved, and other regional bodies, even the UN, so that, the conflict can be brought to. That's the only way political settlement will work. We need something broader, something more extensive, to bring the parties together, negotiate robustly, get them to grant concessions, and then they can reach political settlement. Otherwise, the war will go on, and no one can tell when it comes to an end.
And we know that Sudan's, you mentioned that agreement, and Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces, as the RSF, agreed to that proposal from the United States and then Arab powers for a humanitarian ceasefire, and also said that it is open to talks on a cessation of hostilities. But this is not the fourth time both sides would agree to a ceasefire, and it doesn't go through. Some of those people who are at the table, those four countries, have also been accused of being one of the foreign actors in this war. And I'm wondering if you're optimistic that this ceasefire will pull through.
I'm not optimistic. And the events of the past 2 days have a confirmation of why no one should be optimistic regarding that ceasefire, leading to anything meaningful and positive. There is need for continental initiative or intervention. There is need for the AU to get more involved in this conflict. I say this because, like you rightly pointed out, some of the countries that are involved in mediation are accused of partisanship. And once that is the case, it's always difficult to get, parties to get committed to a ceasefire. But when we have a broader group that are neutral, or at least perceived to be neutral, getting involved, more positive results are usually achieved when that is done. And I'm really surprised that after 2.5 years, we haven't really seen much from the AU intervening to bring this conflict to an end. And that is what needs to happen at this time.
And because you mentioned the AU, and you mentioned it twice now, I mean, it's not just for this, in the Sudanese conflict. We also did not see the presence of the AU in the conflict between the M23 rebels and DRC Congo leaders. And so the AU seems to be very silent on a lot of conflict and all that is going on in Africa, except for recently when it issued a statement, in the Donald Trump's threat to Nigeria. I mean, how do you also call the AU to account to ensure, because foreign actors seems to be playing, more roles on the continent than the AU itself, and wondering how we call the AU to account to ensure that it takes its place and eliminate the foreign actors?
Yeah, the leadership of the AU needs to do a lot more. When the AU transited from the OAU, one of the reasons was that the needs of Africa had changed from when the OAU was established in May 1963. Colonialism, racism were no longer the issue. The issues now were economic development, violent conflicts, stable government, democracy, and the rest. And these are the objectives that the AU is supposed to pursue. So it is surprising that the AU is not involved actively in all of this. Like the September, ceasefire draft that was presented, the AU was not involved. It was just Arab states and the United States. That tells you how weak and, defective the AU has been in attempting to, resolve conflict on the continent. The AU leadership needs to do a lot more. I read a statement about, Trump threat to Nigeria. It was just a statement, an advice, so to speak. Nothing more than that. The AU needs to do a lot more than that if it will stand as a continental body, interested in or committed to promoting stability, peace, and development on the continent.
Well, But Prof, we're following through with this latest development in Sudan. We'll see how it plays out, and if at all the AU will get involved. Thank you so much for your time. As always, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, David Awarawa. Always a pleasure to have you on, Prof.
Thank you for having me.